Joining us now, our Wednesday regular, TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast here on the Go-Goat Sports family of networks. Mr. Darren Dreger, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm just sitting down, relaxing at Palm Beach Airport, getting ready to fly back from the Board of Governors meetings. Bit of a flight delay, but no issues at this point.
Did you get a dip in the ocean there, Dregs?
Somewhat unexpected. I did, yes. That's what happens when you get up as early in the morning as I do. Now, thankfully, I was in a T-shirt and shorts, and I walked to the edge of the ocean where we stayed. The breakers, the shoreline there is somewhat rocky, and the wind and the waves were just wild this week. So the first wave came crashing in and hit me about ankle high, and then I got a text message at like 7:40 Eastern in the morning. And I looked down, and I'm not paying attention, and the following wave hit me about belt high. And so it took a little maneuvering on my part. I'm not as nimble as I used to be at 54, so I didn't get sucked into the ocean, but I certainly got wet unexpectedly.
Well, so long as the phone was preserved, we couldn't imagine insider trading if the phone was compromised.
I know.
Yesterday on your own podcast, you said, without question, the Canucks are now motivated to trade Bo Horvat. So what's happened here over this last week, best you can tell, Drex?
Well, last couple of weeks, Matt, I would say. Patrick Halvey and the Vancouver Canucks, I don't know the specifics of the offer that they made. I mean, I've seen some of the speculation, and I'm sure that it's basically on point. But they made a gesture, a contract offer to extend Bo Horvat in the last couple of weeks, and it was rejected by Newport Sports, by Pat Morris, and by Bo Horvat. And it feels like the Vancouver Canucks said, okay, no problem. That's our line in the sand. Now, things can change pretty quickly, but the messaging that teams are getting, that we're getting in following the story, is that the Vancouver Canucks now have shifted from being motivated to keep Bo Horvat as a captain, extend his time in Vancouver, to truly investigating what the trade market is and likely making a deal at some point between now and March 3rd.
The market for a player like that, do you think that's taken any turn upwards, downwards? How much action are they getting on a player like Bo Horvat right now?
Oh, I'm sure that there are calls coming in, Blake. No doubt about that. I mean, Bo Horvat has had a tremendous start to the season, and it's not like he's tailed off considerably, right? So there are many teams that would look at Bo, and I'm talking about teams that are in the middle of the pack that feel that maybe they need a injection, a boost to try and solidify their stance as a playoff contending team. And then you look at the top of the food chain, some of the teams that are leading their division, maybe leading the conference. The problem, though, and there were a few general managers at the Board of Governors meeting who, wear the dual role of alternate governor or governor as well as being a general manager, who did indicate that, of course, they'd have interest in Horvat. There's lots of teams with interest in Brock Boeser as well. The problem is the same that it always is, and that's the salary cap and trying to make it work. It's less about the asking price, and I don't know specifically what that is. And truthfully, the ask on both Horvat and Boeser is likely going to change, and it may have to change because Vancouver has made it fairly clear to this point that they're not interested in retaining salary. So again, we're having this conversation towards the middle part of December. Things can shift in the new year, and as you get closer to that March 3rd trade deadline.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question, Drex. I mean, you would know the posturing from both sides, agent and team, better than anyone. Do you sniff posturing here? Like, do you think there's another go at an extension and negotiations before the deadline?
Well, I'd be surprised if there wasn't. I'm not saying I expect that. I'd just be surprised because, I've stayed on this file for quite some time, and there's been a strong appetite from the Vancouver Canucks to keep Bo Horvat. But look, I say the same thing. You guys probably feel the same as well. When you're a pending unrestricted free agent, you've earned your right to that. So, Vancouver made a decision to extend JT Miller when they decided to extend, and they pushed Horvat to the side. Bo Horvat has a say in all of this. And, he didn't like the offer that was made several days ago. So maybe he's come to peace with the idea of he's going to have to change. he's potentially leaving Vancouver, and whether or not he's leaving to be a rental player until the end of the year, and then he can look at, what the entire market has to offer him, or you get the rare sign and trade or train and sign. But it just feels like, based on the amount of ground that's been covered here, that Horvat is probably pretty comfortable with where he's at. And as you guys know, he issued the statement basically saying that, he's loved his time in Vancouver. He doesn't want to talk about it. It doesn't want to be a distraction. So unless Vancouver is willing to jump up to whatever the plateau is that Horvat needs to get to stay a Canuck, then I think that his decision's probably been made.
Just want to follow up on something you said in your previous answer. Canucks unwilling to retain salary. I get that on Boeser, but even on a UFA like Horvat, they're unwilling to retain salary?
Well, I don't know that for sure, Matt. That's a fair point by you. You're right. And I would say that they'd be reluctant, but it is an expiring contract. So that might be different. But again,
right.
As we have this conversation mid-December, I think that if I'm Patrick Albion, I'm looking at what Bo Horvat has done for the Vancouver Canucks, and I'm seeing that he should be a real decent commodity. And I don't know why Vancouver would be in any rush to move him. So let's just kind of see what the market develops first.
For guys with term, how much is the salary cap news from yesterday bad news for the Vancouver Canucks? So for the Boeser trades, I don't think it affects the Horvat trade much. But if you knew it was going up $4 or $5 million, you might be willing to take on term a little bit at the very least.
Right.
How much is yesterday's more sobering news going to suppress the market?
Well, it will if it stays that way, Blake. And I think what's been a little bit overshadowed, if not misunderstood, is that, okay, as the collective bargaining agreement is written, and Bettman got a little feisty, if not kind of agitated by our media pestering in his availability. According to the CBA, I mean, the players have to pay back their debt by the end of this season, right? That's the way it's written. And then the escrow drops to 6% for next year. But that doesn't prevent the Players Association from going to the NHL and negotiating a higher bump in the salary cap for next year. It could be $2 million. It could be $3 million. They have not engaged in that discussion yet. The Players Association has not made its proposal, and they probably don't have to do that until, June, I would say, would be the latest. But I get a strong indication that that's what the Players Association are going to do. Because they're less concerned with entirely paying off the player debt than Gary Bettman and the National Hockey League seem to be. So in the moment, which was yesterday, yes, the league's position is that the cap will be flat. It'll bump up by $1 million. But the Players Association does have a say in this process. And if they negotiate, make that presentation, and it's accepted and agreed on, then the salary cap still could jump as much as $2-3 million for next year.
It was classic Bettman, that answer, including this line, Blake. I'm not sure if you heard it. That's not something we're discussing right now. Why are you even suggesting that it's a possibility? Are you negotiating? Has the union suggested that? I'm not having that discussion with you guys. You're like having a negotiation with me on something we're not even negotiating.
He was agitated. He was agitated by it, and that's fine. Again, like he just came out of a room with how many governors, owners, whatnot, and delivered that message. But we've been reporting on this for the better part of 2+ weeks. So I think that he's more annoyed at the reporting leading up to the line of questioning yesterday, and the fact that obviously he hasn't heard from Don Fehr and the Players Association. But as I said a minute ago, I expect that he will in the near future.
Vancouver's own Van City Reynolds, Ryan Reynolds, Hollywood star. He's going to be the owner of the Ottawa Senators.
With somebody.
At least partially the owner, right?
Sure looks like it. I mean, Bettman acknowledged, confirming what our colleague Bruce Garriock from the Ottawa Sun has been reporting now for the last number of weeks, including a meeting with Bettman and Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly sat in on this meeting as well. Look, I think that we can all appreciate why the NHL, from a marketing aspect, would want an A-list celebrity to be part of ownership. I guess the one thing that I would question, though, if you're an owner like Michael Andlauer, who's front and center, his name is out there, he's got deep, deep pockets, do you really feel like you need that? Like, do you feel like you're going to give Ryan Reynolds 5% as a minority owner or whatever that number is, just so that he can do what he's going to do? It feels to me like the NHL loves the attention that Ryan Reynolds has brought, internationally speaking. But if it's not the Ottawa Senators, based on what I heard from Bettman and Daly, maybe there's something else. I do know that the commissioner's office sees high value in some type of relationship with Reynolds.
What's the itchiness like for some of the other Canadian clubs right now, Darren? Edmonton and Calgary scuffling a little bit. This is not what the season they expected. Are they the most desperate of the rest of the Canadian squads? Does Toronto still feel comfortable enough in the way they're playing right now as we get set for a roster freeze?
Yeah, I think that's right. Toronto definitely feels comfortable, and they should. The Maple Leafs are a good story, not just because of where they're positioned in the league or in the Eastern Conference or in their division, just the fact that they've faced many challenges this year and have gotten over, a series of adverse conditions and have survived and have thrived through all of that. So Toronto is a strong team right now, but Leafs Nation is no different than any other Canadian club that has dealt with, enough disappointment over time. And Leafs Nation keeps saying, okay, well, this is the regular season. Let's see what they do in the playoffs. I feel like the pressure, though, is pretty high in Calgary. Brad Treliving, swung for the fence, made a couple of terrific deals. And I think collectively we all thought that Calgary was certainly going to be in a position to challenge for the best team in Canada. And they should be. It hasn't worked out that way. Treliving is always involved in trade fodder and discussion. So he's not going to go down without a fight this year. And likewise with Kenny Holland and the Edmonton Oilers. The goaltending has been a real big question mark in both those cities. Thankfully, Stu Skinner, who's the backup goaltender, should be in Edmonton, has found his stride at the NHL level. And I'm still kicking tires on the idea that the Oilers are going to add a quality defenseman. I know there's pushback from media there, but I also know that the Oilers have at least expressed some interest in Erik Karlsson. I don't think that Erik Karlsson is the right fit in Edmonton. It feels like they need something a little bit more defensively in tune. But if Kenny can make the numbers work, I think that he's willing to do something fairly substantial here in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, and the other tidbit from the Board of Governors is Ted Leonsis in Washington, as Alexander Ovechkin goes out and has him a night for reaching the 800 gold plateau, says and we heard this, it wasn't quite as expressly clear as Mr. Leonsis made it, but we heard this about the scenes here in Vancouver. Leonsis says, we are not rebuilding, while Alexander Ovechkin is still chasing Wayne Gretzky. They are the first team out on the outside looking in the Eastern Conference playoff race. Drake's just a point behind the Rangers and the Islanders, having won 5 in a row. So that makes the Capitals buyers now, I guess, or are they more steady Eddie? Let's see how it goes before we try and load up.
I think the latter, Matt. And by loading up, imagine what they're going to look like when they get healthy again, right? They get Backstrom back up to full speed. They get Tom Wilson back. Those are going to feel like major moves for the Washington Capitals. I mean, for the most part this year, they've been doing a pretty decent job of treading water. But they're not rebuilding. They're not. They know that their window is closing. That's why Samsonov is in Toronto, and that's why Darcy Kemper was signed with his Stanley Cup experience. I had an interesting exchange this week. Do you guys know who Jeffrey Skoll is?
No.
So Jeffrey Skoll is a minority owner with the Washington Capitals. And for anyone listening, just Google him. I had no idea who he was, but he came up to the gaggle of media as we're waiting outside the NHL Board of Governors meeting room, introduced himself. He's big fans of Canadian media. Guy's like worth $4.5 billion. So there's no shortage of financial opportunity, I suppose, aside from the salary cap in Washington. So if there's a way to buy a Stanley Cup, then I think the Capitals are well positioned.
He was the first president of eBay. He's now into
internet
entrepreneurship and film producing, as billionaires do, right? That's
yes.
where they tend to gravitate. Marvelous. Hopefully he can buy airport lounge drinks. Thank you for this, Dregs, and we'll catch up next Wednesday, my friend.
All right, guys. Have a great week.